The stranger's words cut through the autumn air like a blade through silk. "Before 12 seasons pass, you'll raise me 15 scholars," he declared to the embattled schoolteacher, his deep voice carrying across the town square where suspicious townspeople had gathered like vultures circling wounded prey. Minerva stood frozen on the steps of the dilapidated schoolhouse, her dark hands clutching the worn grammar book that represented everything she'd fought to preserve in Iron Creek. The frontier town had treated her like a temporary inconvenience, a bold experiment destined to collapse under the weight of their deliberate indifference and quiet hostility. They'd predicted her departure by autumn's end, broken by loneliness and the crushing burden of teaching children who never appeared. But this towering figure had ridden 300 miles specifically to find her, carrying documents that could elevate her from struggling educator to one of the wealthiest landowners in the territory. His audacious declaration held keys to mysteries she hadn't known existed, her concealed birthright, his shadowy history, and revelations that would reshape their understanding of power and justice. Would his presence doom her as the town's newest curiosity, or would it unleash transformation that neither could control? The wooden benches mocked Minerva with their silence. She adjusted her spectacles and continued the geography lesson to the near-empty classroom, her clear voice bouncing off walls that seemed to absorb hope itself. Beyond the warped door, fragments of conversation drifted through gaps in the timber. Still wasting her breath on ghosts. Foolishness. That building could serve better purposes. Someone should tell her the truth, she's not wanted here. Minerva's chalk pressed harder against the slate board, leaving white trails that spelled out state capitals. 4 students occupied the front benches. 2 Mexican children from the settlement's outskirts, 1 elderly prospector learning to read, and young Jacob whose grandmother had been enslaved before emancipation. The rest of Iron Creek had declared their position through absence. Catherine Blackwell's voice rose above the morning chorus of disapproval. "This charade has persisted far too long. No respectable household permits their offspring to receive instruction from someone of her station." The door swung inward suddenly. Little Maria entered with tears carving paths down her bronze cheeks. "Señorita Minerva, my papa says I cannot return. He says customers will avoid our shop if I continue attending." Minerva knelt beside the 9-year-old girl. "Knowledge is never squandered, Maria. Remember that truth always." The child nodded sorrowfully and slipped back into the harsh sunlight. The prospector, old Thomas, collected his tattered primer. "I'll attempt tomorrow's lesson, but my nephew faces pressure at the lumber mill." He squeezed Minerva's shoulder with calloused kindness before departing. Only Jacob remained. The boy appeared no older than 11, yet his eyes held the accumulated wisdom of generations who had survived impossible circumstances. His family had worked the Blackwell property before freedom came. "You staying, Jacob?" "Yes, ma'am. Grandmother says learning is the single possession no man can steal." Hoofbeats thundered outside, interrupting the lesson. Minerva peered through the cracked window. An enormous man dismounted from a coal-black stallion. His frame towered above 6.5 feet, with shoulders broad enough to carry railroad ties. Trail dust covered his dark leather coat, suggesting weeks of travel. The gathered crowd fell silent as graves. The stranger approached Catherine Blackwell with surprising gentleness for someone of his intimidating size. "Ma'am, I seek the schoolteacher, the colored woman." Catherine's expression twisted with revulsion. "What possible business requires association with that person?" "Educational matters, ma'am. She wastes everyone's resources in that crumbling structure, though I cannot fathom why a gentleman of your obvious standing would seek her company." The giant tipped his wide-brimmed hat and walked toward the schoolhouse. Each footfall seemed deliberate, measured, purposeful. Minerva quickly straightened her plain gray dress and adjusted the pins holding her thick dark hair. Nobody had ever specifically sought her presence before. The door opened with aching slowness. The man needed to duck beneath the frame. His storm-gray eyes surveyed the sparse room before settling on her face. Something shifted in his expression, recognition without previous acquaintance. Miss Hayes? Yes, sir. Wyatt Chambers. I've traveled from Wyoming Territory to speak with you. Jacob shifted nervously on his bench. The boy recognized approaching trouble through hard-won experience. Regarding what, Mr. Chambers? Wyatt removed his hat, revealing dark hair touched with premature silver at the temples. Your reputation as an educator has reached considerable distances. I have a proposal. The crowd outside pressed closer to the windows. Minerva felt their curious stares like hot brands against her skin. Perhaps we should discuss this matter privately. No, ma'am. What I must say, this entire town needs to hear. Wyatt stepped back outside. His voice carried with unexpected refinement when he addressed the assembled townspeople. Folks, I've journeyed far to find this teacher. I've heard extraordinary accounts of her methods and commitment. Catherine laughed bitterly. Extraordinary? She instructs 4 students on favorable days. Most days she addresses empty air. Sometimes the most precious things appear worthless to those who lack understanding of their genuine value. Minerva stepped onto the rickety porch. The autumn sun cast elongated shadows across the rutted street. Every face in the crowd displayed varying degrees of curiosity, contempt, or amusement. Wyatt turned to face her directly. His next words would echo in her memory like church bells. Miss Minerva Hayes, I've come to make you an offer. Before 12 seasons pass, you'll raise me 15 scholars. The silence stretched taut as bowstring. Then chaos erupted. Have you taken leave of your senses? That's thoroughly inappropriate. What manner of arrangement is this? Minerva's cheeks burned with embarrassment and fury. Mr. Chambers, I don't know what sort of woman you believe me to be, but I assure you I'm not available for any such arrangement. Wyatt raised his hand for silence. You misunderstand my meaning, Miss Hayes. I'm not speaking of biological children. I'm speaking of something far more valuable. The crowd quieted, confusion replacing outrage. I'm speaking of young minds shaped through education. 15 students who will carry knowledge and integrity throughout the territory. 15 future leaders who will demonstrate that learning respects no boundaries of birth or circumstance. Reverend Thompson stepped forward from the crowd. Mr. Chambers, while your intentions may be honorable, our situation's reality differs significantly. Miss Hayes's school has struggled attracting students. Struggled because you've all determined it should fail before allowing it proper opportunity. Catherine's voice cut sharp as a knife blade. We maintain our own school. We don't require her methods confusing our children. Wyatt withdrew a folded document from his coat pocket. Minerva recognized the official letterhead immediately, her inheritance notice. How had he obtained it? Her hands trembled as implications crashed over her consciousness. The railroad fortune her father had accumulated in Nevada. Sufficient money to abandon Iron Creek forever. To begin fresh somewhere her heritage wouldn't determine her worth. Wyatt's eyes met hers. He knew about the money. He knew she could walk away from everything. Miss Hayes has choices, he said quietly. She could depart tomorrow and live prosperously anywhere she desires. The question is whether this town deserves the gift she's offering. The crowd began murmuring among themselves. Minerva felt the weight of decision settling on her shoulders like a yoke. Leave with dignity and wealth, or remain and fight for something larger than herself. Wyatt stepped closer. I'm prepared to help you construct something enduring here. Something that will outlive us both. 15 young people who will change the world through education's power. The autumn sun climbed higher, shortening the shadows. The future balanced on the edge of her next words. The vandalism escalated overnight. Minerva swept broken glass into careful piles as dawn illuminated Iron Creek. Someone had also stolen her meager supply of ink and torn pages from her precious textbooks. The message was clear as spring water. Wyatt appeared in the doorway carrying timber and tools. He began work without requesting permission. His hands moved with practiced expertise, measuring and cutting with equipment he'd brought from his saddlebags. "Why are you helping me?" "Because what you're doing matters beyond this moment." Catherine Blackwell's campaign intensified with each passing day. The general store refused to sell Minerva paper or pencils. The boarding house proprietor quadrupled her rent. Even the church ladies averted their eyes when she walked past. For days passed without a single student appearing. Old Thomas sent word through a neighbor that his family forbade his return. Maria's father found employment in the neighboring county to escape social pressure. Only Jacob remained faithful, but his grandmother worried about their safety. Wyatt worked steadily on the schoolhouse repairs. He replaced every broken window and reinforced the sagging roof. When Minerva protested she couldn't afford payment, he simply continued hammering. The harassment followed predictable patterns. Stones through windows after nightfall. Animal waste dumped on the front steps. Anonymous letters threatening worse consequences if she didn't vacate town voluntarily. Benjamin Ashford lingered at the property's edge each morning. The 13-year-old boy clearly wanted to join the lessons, but family pressure held him back. His father owned the largest cattle operation in 4 counties and served as Catherine's most vocal ally. One morning, Benjamin crept close enough to hear Minerva teaching Jacob about water conservation. The boy's eyes widened as she explained how proper irrigation could increase pasture yields. He scratched notes in the dust with a stick. Wyatt noticed the boy's interest. He began speaking louder when discussing practical ranching techniques, ensuring Benjamin could overhear from his hiding place behind the cottonwood tree. "Miss Hayes's methods aren't merely book learning," Wyatt announced to no one in particular. "She connects knowledge to actual problems folks face daily." The comment was clearly intended for Benjamin's ears. The boy nodded eagerly before catching himself and glancing around nervously. That evening, Benjamin approached the schoolhouse after sunset. Wyatt stood guard outside while Minerva conducted her first clandestine lesson. The boy absorbed information like drought-parched earth drinking rain. "My father says book learning makes men weak. Knowledge makes men powerful," Minerva replied. "Ignorance makes them vulnerable." Benjamin's progress was remarkable. Within weeks, he read at levels surpassing many adults in town. His mathematical abilities impressed even Wyatt, whose own education had been extensive before life took darker turns. The giant revealed fragments of his past gradually. Born to Methodist missionaries in Philadelphia, educated at Yale before the war changed everything. A family lost to violence that drove him to become what he once despised. "I spent years tracking dangerous men for compensation. Some deserved their fate. Others were simply desperate." Minerva sensed deeper currents beneath his words. Wyatt carried guilt that had shaped every decision since abandoning his guns. "What changed? I realized I was becoming the very thing that destroyed my family. Violence bred violence until nothing good remained." For more families quietly expressed interest in secret lessons. The children would arrive after dark when prying eyes couldn't observe. Wyatt expanded his guard duties, watching for trouble while education flourished in shadows. The nighttime school grew to 11 students within 6 weeks. Minerva adapted her teaching methods to accommodate varying skill levels and backgrounds. Wyatt contributed practical instruction in surveying, animal husbandry, and basic civil engineering principles. Word spread through whispered conversations and impressive results. Children who attended the secret sessions showed marked improvements in problem-solving abilities. Their parents noticed but dared not speak openly about the source of their progress. Catherine organized a formal town meeting to address what she termed this disruptive experiment once and for all. The announcement promised a final resolution to the school problem. Wyatt spent the day before the meeting making preparations of his own. He retrieved documents from his saddlebags that he'd kept carefully concealed. Legal papers that could change everything if revealed at the right moment. Minerva reviewed her inheritance letter one final time. The railroad fortune offered complete escape from Iron Creek's hostility, a comfortable life without daily battles or constant fear. Part of her longed for such peace. But 11 young minds depended on her now. Benjamin showed leadership potential that could bridge racial divides given proper nurturing. The other students displayed talents that would waste away without educational opportunity. The meeting hall filled beyond capacity. Families crowded together while tension simmered beneath forced politeness. Catherine commanded center stage with practiced authority. This situation has disrupted our community long enough. We have children sneaking around at night instead of maintaining proper associations. We have outsiders interfering in family decisions. Wyatt stood slowly in the back of the room. His height and bearing commanded immediate attention. I've seen remarkable progress in every child who's received Miss Hayes's instruction. Perhaps the problem isn't her teaching methods, but your resistance to proven results. What results? Catherine demanded. She barely has any students. Despite your efforts, the children who do attend show improvements that surpass anything your established school produces. Benjamin's father rose from his seat. My son has been attending these secret meetings against my explicit orders. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Benjamin shrank back as all eyes focused on him. Stand up, son. The boy stood on trembling legs. His father's temper was legendary throughout the county. Tell everyone what you've learned. Benjamin's voice barely carried across the room, but his words would change everything. Benjamin's voice grew stronger as he spoke. Miss Hayes taught me why our cattle were dying last winter. The water source was contaminated upstream. She showed me how to calculate proper herd rotation for pasture recovery. His father's expression shifted from anger to surprise. The Ashford cattle operation had indeed struggled with mysterious livestock losses. She taught me to read land deeds and water rights documents. I can figure compound interest for bank loans now. Real mathematics that matter to ranching. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Several ranchers leaned forward with obvious interest. Benjamin pulled a folded paper from his pocket. I wrote a report on grass rotation systems. Miss Hayes says knowledge without application is mere decoration. The room fell silent as the boy's father examined the document. His weathered face showed grudging amazement at his son's clear handwriting and detailed calculations. Wyatt stepped forward. That young man learned more practical skills in 6 weeks than most children acquire in years of traditional schooling. Catherine's voice cut sharp as winter wind. Pretty words and ranch tricks don't justify undermining established authority. We have proper schools with proper teachers. Then let's compare results directly. The challenge hung in the air like smoke from a pistol shot. Minerva felt every eye in the room focus on her. This moment would determine everything. I propose a public examination, Wyatt continued. Miss Hayes's students against your best pupils. Academic subjects and practical applications both. Catherine's face flushed red. She had expected to crush opposition through social pressure, not academic competition. That's hardly necessary. Everyone knows the quality of our established education. Then you shouldn't fear the comparison. Reverend Thompson rose from his seat near the front. His voice carried moral authority that commanded respect. Perhaps such a demonstration would settle the matter fairly. Let results speak louder than assumptions. The crowd began taking sides. Ranchers who had noticed their children's improvement supported the examination. Established families worried about social disruption if change proved necessary. Minerva found her voice despite her racing heart. I accept the challenge. 10 days from today. Public examination covering reading, writing, mathematics, and practical problem solving. The meeting dispersed with electric tension crackling between opposing groups. Wyatt walked Minerva back to the schoolhouse while shadows lengthened across the dusty street. "Are you certain about this? We've moved beyond certainty. Now we prove what we've built." The following days blurred together in intensive preparation. Wyatt revealed the full scope of his education as he helped design examination questions. His Yale training had included classical rhetoric, advanced mathematics, and natural philosophy. "My father believed knowledge belonged to everyone willing to work for it. He taught former slaves alongside plantation owners' children until violence forced them to leave Tennessee." Minerva understood why Wyatt had sought her out specifically. She represented his family's interrupted mission continued in different circumstances. Secret supporters emerged from unexpected places. The blacksmith provided metal materials for practical demonstrations. 3 ranching families contributed supplies while avoiding public association with the effort. Benjamin became the bridge between worlds. His obvious improvements impressed even skeptical neighbors. Other children began asking parents for permission to attend the examination as observers. Wyatt spent evenings researching property records in the courthouse basement. The building's archives contained decades of land transactions and legal documents. His methodical search uncovered patterns that told disturbing stories. "I found something significant." He spread faded survey maps across Minerva's desk. Property boundaries from 35 years earlier showed different ownership than current records indicated. "Your father owned substantial acreage where the Blackwell Ranch now stands. These documents show the original homestead claims." Minerva traced the boundaries with her finger. The land encompassed prime grazing territory and water rights worth enormous sums by current standards. "How did the ownership change?" "Forged transfer documents dated just after your family left the territory. The signatures don't match any legal witnesses from that period." The implications crashed over her like flood waters. Her family hadn't simply moved away. They had been systematically robbed of valuable property through fraudulent legal manipulation. Catherine's late husband signed as witness to the transfer, but the courthouse records show he was in San Francisco on business during the supposed transaction date. Wyatt had uncovered not just historical injustice, but ongoing criminal fraud. The revelation shifted power dynamics completely. What do we do with this information? We use it strategically. Timing matters more than righteousness when confronting established corruption. The examination day arrived with unseasonably warm weather. The entire town gathered in the church hall since no other building could accommodate the crowd. Neutral observers came from neighboring settlements to witness the unprecedented contest. 11 children sat on one side representing Minerva's teaching methods. The established school selected their 8 best students for comparison. The contrast was immediately obvious. Minerva's students displayed calm confidence despite their diverse backgrounds and ages. The traditional students seemed nervous under pressure from family expectations and social scrutiny. The academic portions proceeded systematically: reading comprehension, mathematical problem solving, written composition, and oral presentation. Each section revealed growing disparities in skill levels and practical application abilities. Benjamin delivered a presentation on range management that left several ranchers taking detailed notes. Jacob solved geometry problems using construction principles Wyatt had taught him. Even the youngest students demonstrated reading abilities that surpassed their traditional counterparts. The practical applications sealed the demonstration. Minerva's students calculated property values, designed simple machines, and explained scientific principles underlying common ranching problems. Their education connected directly to adult responsibilities and economic realities. The established school students struggled with any application beyond rote memorization. Their knowledge remained compartmentalized and impractical for frontier life's demands. As the examination concluded, even Catherine's strongest supporters could not deny the obvious superiority of results. The educational revolution had demonstrated itself through undeniable evidence. Wyatt chose that moment to reveal his most powerful weapon. Wyatt unfolded the yellowed survey maps before the stunned crowd. The documents crackled with age as he spread them across the makeshift podium. Every eye in the church hall focused on the faded ink and official seals. These are the original land grants from 1852. They show clear ownership records that differ significantly from current property boundaries. Catherine's face drained of color. She recognized the potential implications of historical document examination. According to these surveys, Minerva Hayes's father held legal title to approximately 4,000 acres of prime grazing land, the same territory that now comprises the northern section of the Blackwell Ranch. Gasps echoed through the packed hall. The Blackwell Ranch represented the county's most valuable agricultural property. Water rights alone were worth fortunes in the arid territory. Wyatt produced additional documents from his leather satchel. The transfer records show suspicious irregularities, witness signatures that don't match courthouse records, dates that contradict documented travel logs, legal procedures that violate territorial statutes. Minerva sat motionless as the revelations washed over the assembly. Her family's disappearance from the territory suddenly made perfect sense. They hadn't left voluntarily. They had been systematically driven out after losing their rightful property to fraud. Mr. Chambers, these accusations are outrageous. Catherine's voice trembled with barely controlled fury. My family acquired that land through legitimate transactions decades ago. Then you won't object to a formal legal review of all documentation. The trap closed with devastating precision. Catherine could not refuse without appearing guilty, but agreement would expose the fraudulent transfers to territorial court examination. Benjamin stood suddenly from his seat among the other students. His young voice carried surprising authority as he addressed the assembly. Miss Hayes never asked for anything except the chance to teach. You all tried to drive her away because you were afraid of what she represented. Now we discover she has more right to be here than most of us. His father's hand fell on the boy's shoulder with obvious pride. The transformation from opponent to supporter was complete and public. My son learned more in 2 months of night school than 4 years at our established institution. That's not an opinion. It's measurable fact demonstrated here today. Other parents began voicing similar sentiments. The educational superiority was undeniable after the public examination. Children who had attended Minerva's classes showed advanced skills that translated directly to adult responsibilities. Wyatt sensed the moment for maximum impact. Miss Hayes has legal claim to property worth more than most of us will earn in our lifetimes. She could pursue full restitution through territorial courts and likely succeed. The implications hung heavy as storm clouds. If Minerva reclaimed her family's stolen land, the economic foundation of Iron Creek would shift dramatically. Property values, water rights, and agricultural leases would require complete renegotiation. Instead, she chose to serve this community as an educator. She invested her inheritance money in school improvements rather than legal fees for property recovery. Minerva found her voice despite the emotional turmoil of learning about her family's true history. I didn't come here seeking wealth or revenge. I came seeking the opportunity to teach children who deserve better futures. The words carried across the silent hall with quiet dignity. Even former opponents recognized the grace in her position. But I won't continue accepting harassment and sabotage while providing a service this community desperately needs. Wyatt stepped beside her with protective presence. Miss Hayes is prepared to establish the first integrated school in 4 territories. Modern educational methods that prepare children for changing times. Reverend Thompson rose from his seat with moral authority that commanded respect. Perhaps we should consider this an opportunity rather than a threat. Educational excellence benefits everyone's children. The crowd began dividing into new alliances based on demonstrated results rather than inherited prejudices. Practical parents recognized superior teaching when their children's improvement could not be denied. Catherine made one final attempt to maintain control. This is all very dramatic, but we have established institutions that serve our community adequately. Your institutions just failed a public comparison test, Wyatt replied flatly. 11 children with limited resources outperformed your best students in every category. Benjamin stepped forward again with the fearless honesty of youth. Miss Hayes taught us that ignorance is a choice. You can choose to keep making it, but we don't have to. The boy's words carried more power than any adult argument. Children speaking truth to established authority created undeniable moral pressure. Families began approaching Minerva directly to discuss enrollment for their children. The economic advantages of superior education outweighed social concerns when practical benefits were obvious. Wyatt organized informal groups to discuss implementation details. The transformation from resistance to cooperation happened gradually but inevitably as parents recognized their children's needs. We'll need expanded facilities to accommodate increased enrollment. Miss Hayes's property claims include suitable land for construction. The territorial government offers grants for innovative educational programs. Plans developed organically as the community imagined new possibilities. The fear of change gave way to excitement about educational opportunities previously unavailable in frontier settlements. Minerva felt the weight of historical injustice transform into leverage for positive change. Her family's stolen legacy would become the foundation for educational progress that honored their memory. Wyatt's original promise began taking concrete form. 15 young people receiving exceptional education who would carry knowledge and dignity throughout the territory. The vision expanded beyond individual students to systematic change that could influence an entire generation. The evening concluded with unprecedented cooperation between former adversaries. Practical necessities created strange alliances as the community adapted to new realities. Catherine departed in tight-lipped silence, her social authority permanently diminished by legal revelations and educational failure. The old order had crumbled under the weight of demonstrated truth. The legal documents arrived from the territorial capital within 2 weeks. Official seals confirmed Wyatt's research. Minerva held clear title to 4,000 acres of prime ranch land, mineral rights included. The fraudulent transfers were declared null and void by territorial decree. Catherine Blackwell packed her belongings in bitter silence. She faced criminal charges for maintaining property obtained through document forgery and illegal seizure. Decades of stolen prosperity crumbled under legal scrutiny that revealed systematic corruption extending beyond a single family. The community watched in stunned fascination as power structures realigned overnight. Minerva transformed from dismissed outcast to the largest landowner in 4 counties. Her inheritance combined with recovered property created wealth that dwarfed most territorial fortunes. Wyatt handled the legal transitions with methodical precision. His Yale education included sufficient law study to navigate complex property transfers. He ensured every document was properly filed and witnessed to prevent future disputes. You could own half the territory if you pursued every fraudulent claim. I want justice, not conquest. Minerva used her newfound authority with careful restraint. She offered fair buyouts to families who had unknowingly purchased stolen land. Tenant ranchers received generous lease terms that improved their circumstances rather than destroying them. The old schoolhouse was demolished to make room for a proper educational facility. Construction began immediately using local labor at wages that exceeded regional standards. The project employed dozens of men who had previously shunned any association with the despised teacher. Benjamin supervised younger workers with knowledge gained from Wyatt's engineering instruction. The boys' leadership abilities impressed adults who recognized natural talent when properly cultivated. Miss Hayes says the building should serve the community for 75 years. Every detail matters for permanent construction. Other children from the secret night classes demonstrated similar growth. Jacob designed efficient ventilation systems using mathematical principles that reduced construction costs. Even the youngest students contributed practical solutions that improved the overall project. Enrollment applications arrived daily from families throughout the territory. Word of the educational revolution spread through trading networks that connected isolated settlements. Parents traveled hundreds of miles seeking admission for their children. Wyatt established admission criteria that prioritized merit over social standing. Academic potential and family commitment to education mattered more than wealth or connections. The selection process created unprecedented diversity in frontier education. We're not just building a school. We're proving that excellence recognizes no artificial boundaries. The first integrated classes began before construction was complete. Temporary facilities accommodated 85 students of varying backgrounds and abilities. White, Black, Mexican, and Chinese children learned together using methods that emphasized cooperation over competition. Minerva adapted her teaching techniques to serve the expanded population. She organized students by ability rather than age, allowing advanced learners to progress rapidly while ensuring struggling students received necessary support. Wyatt taught practical skills that complemented academic instruction. Surveying, mechanics, agricultural science, and basic engineering provided hands-on applications for theoretical knowledge. Students learned by solving real problems that affected their families and communities. The educational model attracted attention from territorial administrators in distant capitals. Government officials visited to observe innovative methods that produced measurable results. Their reports praised the unique combination of academic rigor and practical application. This institution represents the future of frontier education. Students graduate with skills that immediately benefit their communities. Success stories multiplied as the first graduates demonstrated their capabilities. Former students established businesses, improved ranching operations, and provided leadership in neighboring settlements. The educational investment paid dividends throughout the territory. Catherine made a final appearance at the school's dedication ceremony. Her reduced circumstances were evident in worn clothing and borrowed transportation. The proud matriarch had become a cautionary example of justice delayed but not denied. She approached Minerva with genuine humility that surprised former allies and enemies alike. "I was wrong about you, about everything you represented. We all make mistakes. The measure of character is how we respond to truth when it's revealed." The conversation was brief but significant. Catherine's public acknowledgement of error provided closure that allowed the community to move forward without lingering resentment. Wyatt counted enrollment figures with satisfaction. As the third year began, 123 students attended regular classes with another 60 in evening programs for working adults. The original vision had expanded beyond his most optimistic projections. 15 young people now formed the advanced leadership class he had envisioned in his original promise. Benjamin led the group with natural authority that bridged racial and economic divisions. The students planned to establish similar schools in territories throughout the expanding frontier. Education multiplies when properly planted. These 15 will teach hundreds who will teach thousands. The mathematical progression of knowledge transfer created exponential impact that would influence generations. Wyatt's impossible vow was becoming measurable reality through systematic implementation. Minerva reviewed applications for the teacher training program funded by her recovered inheritance. Young women from across the territory sought instruction in modern educational methods that they could carry to isolated communities lacking proper schools. "We're not just changing Iron Creek, we're changing the entire frontier." The ripple effect spread through economic and social networks that connected distant settlements. Former students carried letters of recommendation that opened opportunities previously reserved for established families. Merit began replacing privilege as the standard for advancement. Property values throughout the region increased as families relocated to access superior educational opportunities. The economic benefits of academic excellence attracted investment that transformed the entire territory from backward frontier to progressive settlement. Wyatt surveyed the completed campus with deep satisfaction. Modern buildings housed advanced equipment that rivaled Eastern institutions. The investment in permanent facilities reflected confidence in long-term success that would serve multiple generations. The impossible had become inevitable through persistent application of truth and dignity. Two outcasts had transformed an entire community by refusing to accept artificial limitations imposed by ignorance and prejudice. The graduation platform stood beneath towering pines that had witnessed the transformation of Iron Creek. Families from across 4 territories gathered for the ceremony that would mark the completion of Wyatt's impossible promise. 6 years had passed since his outrageous vow to the lonely teacher. 15 young people sat in the front row wearing identical silver sashes that identified them as the first leadership class. Benjamin Ashford held the position of student speaker, his presence bridging worlds that once seemed permanently divided. Jacob represented the formerly enslaved families who had found dignity through education. 13 others came from diverse backgrounds united by shared learning. Minerva stood at the podium reviewing her prepared remarks. The nervous teacher who once spoke to empty benches had become a confident educator whose methods were studied throughout the Western Territories. Her transformation mirrored the community's evolution from hostility to embrace of integrated progress. Wyatt watched from the side of the platform with quiet satisfaction. The giant who had ridden into town with an impossible promise had fulfilled his vow through patience and strategic wisdom rather than force or intimidation. His 15 scholars were ready to carry knowledge and dignity into an expanding world. Today we celebrate more than individual achievement, Minerva began. We celebrate proof that excellence recognizes no artificial boundaries imposed by ignorance or prejudice. The audience included former opponents who now supported the educational revolution they once resisted. Practical results had overcome theoretical objections as children demonstrated capabilities that benefited entire families and communities. Benjamin rose to deliver the student address. His words carried authority earned through academic achievement and moral courage displayed during the community's most challenging moments. 6 years ago, Miss Hayes taught empty benches because fear prevented families from embracing opportunity. Today, we graduate knowing that education is the foundation of freedom and dignity. The young man's speech traced the school's evolution from secret night classes to the territorial model institution. His perspective provided historical context that reminded everyone how dramatically circumstances had changed. Mr. Chambers promised 15 scholars through education rather than biology. We represent that promise fulfilled, but also the beginning of something larger. Each graduate had already secured placement in positions throughout the territory. Some would teach in communities lacking proper schools. Others planned business ventures that would employ local workers at fair wages. 3 intended to pursue law degrees that would bring justice to frontier settlements. The multiplication effect was already visible in practical terms. Former students had established 23 schools in isolated communities using methods learned at Iron Creek. The educational revolution was spreading organically through networks of shared knowledge and proven results. Wyatt stepped forward to address the assembly as construction supervisor and practical skills instructor. His role had evolved from mysterious stranger to essential community member whose contributions were universally recognized. When I made my promise to Miss Hayes, many of you considered it impossible or inappropriate. Today, you witness the power of education to transform individuals, communities, and entire regions. The teacher training program had graduated 61 women who carried modern educational methods throughout the frontier. Young teachers armed with superior techniques were establishing schools that served previously neglected populations. Minerva's inheritance and recovered property provided permanent funding for expansion that would continue indefinitely. The economic foundation ensured that educational excellence would not depend on temporary political support or individual generosity. These 15 young people represent the first harvest of a permanent planting, Wyatt continued. Their children and students will carry this influence into the next century. The ceremony concluded with the presentation of graduation certificates signed by territorial officials who recognized the institution's exceptional standards. Each document represented individual achievement within a larger transformation that had redefined educational possibilities. Families gathered for celebratory meals that mixed formerly segregated social groups in unprecedented harmony. The graduation feast demonstrated practical integration that had evolved naturally from shared educational experiences. Benjamin's father approached Minerva with gratitude that reflected his complete transformation from opponent to supporter. The successful rancher credited his son's education with improving their operations and expanding economic opportunities. "You gave my boy knowledge that will serve him throughout life. More importantly, you taught him that character matters more than circumstances of birth." Similar conversations occurred throughout the gathering as parents recognized the gift their children had received. Educational excellence had created measurable improvements in family circumstances and community prosperity. Wyatt and Minerva walked through the campus as evening shadows lengthened across carefully maintained grounds. The permanent facilities represented investment in future generations who would benefit from their sacrifice and vision. The 15 scholars are ready to change the world. And they're only the beginning. The promise had been fulfilled, but its implications extended far beyond the original commitment. Systematic change was occurring through the multiplication of knowledge and the persistence of truth applied with dignity and strategic wisdom. Applications for the following year exceeded facility capacity by substantial margins. The success of the educational model had created demand that required continued expansion to serve families seeking opportunities for their children. The impossible vow had become inevitable reality through patient application of principles that recognized human potential regardless of artificial limitations. Two outcasts had transformed an entire region by refusing to accept predetermined roles assigned by ignorance and prejudice. The graduation celebration continued late into the evening as the community marked the completion of one chapter and the beginning of countless others. The 15 scholars would carry their education throughout the expanding frontier, multiplying the impact of Wyatt's promise through generations yet unborn. Education had proven more powerful than force, dignity more effective than revenge, and truth more lasting than convenience. The transformation of Iron Creek would influence the development of the Western Territories for decades to come. 3 months after graduation, the first reports arrived from the dispersed scholars. Benjamin had established a school in a mining settlement 200 miles north. His letters described children of prospectors and merchants learning together, the same integration that had transformed Iron Creek now spreading to communities that had never questioned their established divisions. Jacob traveled south to a settlement along the border where Mexican and American families lived in uneasy proximity. His school bridged linguistic and cultural divisions through practical education that served everyone's children. The mathematical principles he taught applied equally to farming and commerce, creating common ground where suspicion had previously festered. Sarah Chen, one of the Chinese students from Minerva's integrated classes, opened a school in a railroad camp where workers from 6 different countries struggled to communicate. She taught English while respecting native languages, creating a learning environment that prepared children for a world larger than their immediate circumstances. Each report reinforced Wyatt's original vision. The 15 scholars weren't just teaching, they were transforming communities through the systematic application of principles proven at Iron Creek. Minerva compiled the reports into a comprehensive document that territorial officials studied with increasing interest. The governor himself visited Iron Creek to observe the mother institution that had spawned such remarkable results. "Miss Hayes, your methods are producing measurable improvements in literacy, economic productivity, and social cohesion across multiple settlements. The territorial legislature is considering formal adoption of your educational model." The recognition brought both satisfaction and increased responsibility. Minerva expanded the teacher training program to accommodate growing demand. Young women arrived from across the territories seeking instruction in integrated education methods. Wyatt supervised construction of additional facilities to house the expanded programs. The campus grew from a single building to a complex of structures that rivaled established Eastern academies. Every addition was built with the same attention to permanent quality that characterized the original construction. "We're building for generations we'll never meet," Wyatt reminded workers during construction meetings. "Every joint, every foundation, every detail matters beyond our lifetimes." The practical philosophy that guided educational methods also shaped physical construction. Students learned engineering principles by participating in actual building projects. Mathematics became concrete through measurement and calculation for real structures. The integration of theory and practice created graduates who understood abstract concepts through tangible application. A geometry lesson might involve surveying property boundaries. Arithmetic skills developed through calculating material costs for construction projects. The approach revolutionized frontier education by connecting academic knowledge to immediate practical needs. Parents who initially questioned the value of formal schooling recognized direct benefits when their children applied learning to family businesses and ranching operations. As the fourth year began, enrollment exceeded 300 students across all programs. The campus employed 42 teachers, most of them graduates of Minerva's training program. The institution had become self-sustaining, generating its own qualified instructors who carried proven methods to new locations. Wyatt watched the expansion with mixed emotions. Success had exceeded his most optimistic projections, but growth brought complications that threatened the intimate educational environment that had characterized the early years. "We're losing something precious as we grow larger," he confessed to Minerva during an evening walk through the campus. The personal connection between teacher and student that made everything possible. "That's why we're training teachers who understand the principles rather than just copying methods," Minerva replied. Each graduate carries the philosophy forward, adapting to local circumstances while maintaining core values. The conversation reflected broader tensions emerging as the educational revolution spread across territories. Some communities embraced integrated schools enthusiastically. Others resisted change despite demonstrated benefits, clinging to familiar divisions even when children suffered from limited opportunities. Territorial authorities faced increasing pressure to mandate educational standards that would ensure quality instruction in remote settlements. The debate centered on whether excellence could be legislated or whether it emerged organically from committed educators working with supportive communities. Minerva testified before the territorial legislature, presenting evidence that successful schools shared common characteristics regardless of location. Committed teachers, community support, practical curriculum connected to local needs, and integrated student populations that reflected actual demographic realities. "You cannot mandate excellence through regulation," she told assembled politicians. "But you can remove obstacles that prevent committed educators from succeeding. Provide resources, eliminate discriminatory restrictions, and support communities willing to embrace proven methods." The testimony influenced territorial policy in ways that extended far beyond Iron Creek. New regulations eliminated restrictions that had prevented integrated education in some settlements. Funding formulas directed resources toward schools demonstrating measurable results rather than rewarding established institutions regardless of performance. The policy changes created opportunities for reformers throughout the territories while generating resistance from defenders of traditional arrangements. The educational revolution became entangled with broader political conflicts over territorial governance and social organization. Catherine Blackwell's son emerged as a vocal opponent of the new policies. William Blackwell had inherited his mother's bitterness along with her diminished property. He organized resistance among families who resented the social transformations that accompanied educational reform. "These outsiders are destroying our traditional way of life," William declared at public meetings. "They use education as a weapon to undermine established families and time-honored customs." The opposition gained traction among settlers who feared change and resented successful integration that challenged their assumptions about racial hierarchies and social organization. The backlash manifested in harassment of integrated schools, intimidation of families who enrolled children in reform institutions, and political pressure on territorial officials. Wyatt recognized the pattern from his earlier life tracking dangerous men across lawless territories. Opposition to educational reform was mobilizing forces that could turn violent if not addressed strategically. "We need to anticipate escalation," he warned Minerva. "William Blackwell is organizing resistance that goes beyond political disagreement. Some of his supporters are willing to use force to stop what we've built." The warning proved prophetic when two integrated schools in neighboring counties suffered arson attacks within the same week. Both buildings burned to foundations while night riders left threatening messages warning other communities against similar experiments. The violence shocked territorial officials who had assumed that demonstrated success would overcome resistance through rational persuasion. The attacks revealed deeper currents of resentment that rational arguments couldn't address. Minerva called an emergency meeting of graduates teaching in threatened communities. 23 young educators gathered at Iron Creek to discuss security measures and strategic responses to escalating opposition. Benjamin reported that families in his mining settlement faced economic pressure to withdraw children from integrated schools. Merchants refused service to parents who defied social pressure. Workers lost employment for enrolling children in Benjamin's classes. "We're fighting the same battles you fought 6 years ago," Benjamin told Minerva. "Except now they're organized across multiple communities, coordinating pressure to crush integrated education before it spreads further." The meeting developed systematic responses based on lessons learned during Iron Creek's transformation. Document everything. Build alliances with supportive families. Connect educational benefits to economic improvements that practical parents couldn't ignore. Appeal to territorial authorities for protection and enforcement of anti-intimidation laws. The strategies helped stabilize threatened schools while raising public awareness of organized resistance to educational reform. Newspapers in distant cities published accounts of frontier educators battling entrenched prejudice to serve children denied opportunities by discriminatory customs. The publicity attracted support from Eastern philanthropists who provided financial resources that made threatened schools less vulnerable to local economic pressure. Independent funding allowed integrated institutions to survive even when local merchants and employers attempted to starve them through coordinated boycotts. William Blackwell responded by escalating tactics. He organized legal challenges claiming that integrated schools violated parental rights by exposing children to inappropriate social mixing. The lawsuit sought to establish legal precedents that would justify shutting down reform institutions throughout the territories. The legal battles consumed resources and energy that Minerva would have preferred investing in educational expansion. But she recognized that losing legal fights would undo years of progress by establishing precedents that legitimized discrimination. "We're fighting for principles that extend far beyond our individual schools," she told exhausted teachers during a particularly difficult period. "Every legal victory protects not just our institutions but future generations who deserve educational opportunities regardless of circumstances of birth." The territorial Supreme Court eventually ruled in favor of integrated education, establishing precedent that parents could not use racial preferences to deny children access to superior instruction. The decision represented a landmark victory that shifted legal foundations throughout the Western Territories. William Blackwell disappeared from public view after the legal defeats. Some reported he'd left the territory entirely, relocating to regions where his views enjoyed broader support. Others whispered darker rumors about plans for violent resistance that couldn't succeed through legal channels. Wyatt increased security precautions at Iron Creek while maintaining a low profile that didn't alarm students or families. His experience tracking dangerous men had taught him to recognize genuine threats amid overheated rhetoric. William Blackwell represented the former category, a bitter man with resources and motivation to cause serious harm. The anticipated attack came on a moonless night 3 weeks after the Supreme Court decision. 15 armed men surrounded the main academic building where Minerva was working late on administrative matters. They carried torches and weapons, intending to burn the structure and eliminate the leader of the educational revolution. Wyatt had anticipated the timing and approach. He'd positioned trusted graduates at strategic locations around campus with instructions to alert authorities at first sign of trouble. When the attack came, riders were already racing toward town to summon the territorial marshal. The giant confronted the attackers alone, standing on the building's front steps with arms crossed. His imposing physical presence gave the armed men momentary pause. "You're going to want to reconsider your plans tonight," Wyatt said calmly. "Territorial Marshal is riding this direction with 20 deputies. You'll all face federal charges for attacking a territorial institution." William Blackwell stepped forward from the group. "You're bluffing. No one knows we're here. My people spotted you 2 miles out. You're surrounded and the law is coming. Only question is whether you leave now or face arrest for attempted arson and assault." The standoff stretched across tense minutes. Some attackers clearly wanted to retreat. Others, emboldened by weapons and darkness, pressed forward despite warnings. The sound of approaching horses resolved the confrontation. The territorial marshal arrived with sufficient force to overwhelm the attackers without bloodshed. William Blackwell and his co-conspirators were arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit arson and attempted assault on a territorial institution. The failed attack became the final act in the struggle over integrated education. The sight of established settlers facing serious criminal charges for attacking a school shocked even some opponents of educational reform. The violence had crossed lines that most frontier communities wouldn't tolerate regardless of political disagreements. Public opinion shifted decisively toward protecting educational institutions from intimidation. The territorial legislature passed enhanced protections for schools and teachers, making it a serious crime to interfere with educational activities through threats or violence. The legal and social victory secured the foundation for continued expansion. Integrated schools spread throughout the territories over the following years, each new institution built on principles proven at Iron Creek and defended through legal battles that established protective precedents. Minerva's teacher training program graduated its 100th student during the 6th year. The milestone represented systematic transformation of frontier education through multiplication of qualified instructors who carried proven methods to communities that had never imagined such possibilities. Wyatt marked the occasion by reviewing the original promise that had sparked everything 6 years earlier. 15 scholars educated to change the world through knowledge and dignity. The literal promise had been fulfilled and exceeded. But the deeper commitment, transforming frontier society through systematic application of educational principles, was still unfolding across expanding territories. The 15 were just the beginning, Wyatt reflected during the centennial celebration. Now we have hundreds carrying the same mission forward. The multiplication continues exponentially, just as we hoped. The celebration attracted visitors from across the Western Territories. Governors, legislators, educators, and reformers gathered to honor the institution that had sparked a revolution in frontier education. Speeches praised Minerva's vision and courage while crediting Wyatt's strategic wisdom and protective presence. But the most meaningful recognition came from former students whose lives had been transformed by the opportunities they'd received. Working adults who could read contracts and avoid exploitation. Small business owners who used mathematical skills to prosper. Community leaders who applied problem-solving abilities to local challenges. The accumulated testimony of changed lives represented the truest measure of success, not awards or official recognition, but practical improvements in how people lived and what they could accomplish through knowledge and dignity. As the 7th year began, Minerva turned increasing responsibility over to younger administrators while focusing on writing comprehensive documentation of educational methods. Her goal was to create resources that would allow future reformers to build on lessons learned rather than repeating early mistakes. The resulting texts became standard references throughout the territories. Practical Education for Frontier Communities provided detailed guidance on connecting curriculum to local needs. Teaching Diverse Students addressed methods for serving children from varied backgrounds in single classrooms. Building Community Support offered strategic advice for educators facing resistance. The books multiplied Minerva's influence far beyond direct teaching. Educators she would never meet implemented methods described in her texts, extending the educational revolution to settlements that couldn't access formal teacher training. Wyatt supervised construction of a permanent library to house educational resources and serve as a center for ongoing innovation. The building incorporated the latest developments in fireproofing and environmental control, protecting valuable materials while providing comfortable spaces for study and research. "We're building institutional memory," Wyatt explained during the dedication ceremony. "Everything we've learned, every mistake and success, preserved for future generations who will face their own challenges. The library became a pilgrimage destination for educators throughout the Western Territories. Teachers traveled hundreds of miles to study original documents, observe advanced methods, and connect with a community of reformers working toward common goals. The network effects created by the library and training programs produced a self-sustaining ecosystem of educational innovation. Graduates returned periodically to share insights from their own teaching experiences. New methods were tested, refined, and disseminated through formal and informal channels. The institution evolved continuously while maintaining core principles that had guided the original transformation. As the 8th year concluded, territorial officials commissioned a comprehensive study of educational outcomes in integrated versus traditional schools. The research provided quantitative confirmation of what practical observation had already demonstrated. Students in integrated schools showed superior performance across all measured categories. Reading comprehension, mathematical abilities, practical problem-solving skills, and preparation for adult responsibilities all showed marked advantages in integrated institutions using methods developed at Iron Creek. The achievement gaps that plagued traditional schools largely disappeared when children learned together using curriculum connected to real-world applications. The research findings influenced territorial policy throughout the western regions. New settlements were required to establish integrated schools from inception rather than perpetuating discriminatory systems that later required difficult reforms. Funding formulas rewarded demonstrated performance rather than institutional tradition. The policy changes accelerated transformation that was already underway. Within a decade of Wyatt's original promise, integrated education had become the expected standard throughout 4 territories rather than a radical experiment facing organized resistance. Minerva watched the changes with deep satisfaction. The lonely teacher who once addressed empty benches had sparked a revolution that transformed frontier society. The impossible had become inevitable through persistent application of principles that recognized human potential regardless of artificial limitations. On the 10-year anniversary of Wyatt's arrival in Iron Creek, the entire community gathered for a celebration that acknowledged how far they'd traveled from that autumn day when a giant stranger made an outrageous promise to a desperate teacher. The original schoolhouse site now housed a bronze marker commemorating the transformation that began there. The inscription captured the essence of what had been accomplished. Here stood the building where Minerva Hayes taught empty benches while dreaming of futures that seemed impossible. Here Wyatt Chambers made a promise that changed a territory. Here ordinary people proved that courage and persistence can transform the world. Hundreds gathered for the anniversary ceremony. Former students, now adults with children of their own. Teachers trained in methods developed through years of experimentation and refinement. Community leaders who had supported or opposed the original reforms. They came to mark a transformation that had touched all their lives. Benjamin Ashford, now a prominent educator and territorial legislator, delivered the keynote address. His words captured the journey from frightened boy hiding behind a cottonwood tree to confident leader serving entire communities. 10 years ago, I was terrified to be seen learning from Miss Hayes. My family's social position depended on maintaining divisions that everyone accepted as natural and inevitable. But curiosity overcame fear. I crept close enough to hear lessons that changed my understanding of the world and my place in it. The audience listened in attentive silence as Benjamin traced his personal transformation alongside the community's broader evolution. Mr. Chambers saw that curiosity and created space for it to grow safely. Miss Hayes welcomed me despite the risks my attendance created for her precarious position. Together they demonstrated that courage looks like, not the absence of fear, but action despite fear in service of principles larger than personal comfort. Benjamin's speech crystallized the meaning of the decade's struggles and achievements. Individual courage had sparked collective transformation. Small actions had produced large consequences. Impossible promises had become inevitable realities through persistent application of truth and dignity. Wyatt spoke briefly after Benjamin concluded. The giant's words carried the weight of someone who had witnessed the entire arc from desperate beginning to triumphant celebration. 10 years ago, I made what seemed like a ridiculous promise. 15 scholars educated to change the world. Many of you doubted such transformation was possible. Some actively worked to prevent it. But here we stand, surrounded by evidence that impossible is just another word for not yet accomplished. Wyatt gestured toward the assembled crowd, inviting them to recognize their own role in the transformation. Every person here contributed to what we've built. Some through direct support, others through opposition that forced us to sharpen our methods and strengthen our resolve. The result belongs to all of us, a demonstration that communities can choose their futures rather than accepting predetermined patterns imposed by tradition and fear. The celebration continued late into the evening. Families shared meals that mixed formerly segregated social groups in easy harmony. Children played together without the consciousness of divisions that had separated their parents' generation. The integration that once seemed radical had become normal life for young people who couldn't remember when things were different. As darkness fell and fires burned against the autumn chill, Minerva and Wyatt walked the campus paths one final time. The conversation turned reflective as they contemplated a decade's accomplishments and the work that remained. "We've built something that will outlast us," Minerva said. "The institution, the methods, the trained teachers carrying our principles forward. It's more than I imagined that first day when you made your impossible promise." "The promise was never impossible," Wyatt replied. "Just improbable. The difference matters. Impossible can't be done. Improbable just requires sufficient courage and persistence." They paused at the library entrance, looking back across the campus that had grown from a single broken-down schoolhouse into a complex of substantial buildings housing hundreds of students and dozens of teachers. "What comes next?" Minerva asked. "We've accomplished the original vision. Where do we go from here?" "We continue the work," Wyatt said simply. "New challenges will emerge. Different obstacles will require fresh strategies. But the principles remain constant: education transforms lives, dignity matters more than circumstances of birth, and courage can change the world." The answer satisfied Minerva because it acknowledged both achievement and ongoing responsibility. They had proven that transformation was possible. Now they would demonstrate that success could be sustained and extended rather than becoming a temporary exception that reverted to familiar patterns. As they walked back toward the residential buildings, the sounds of celebration continued across the campus. Laughter, conversation, music played on borrowed instruments. The ordinary sounds of community gathered in celebration of shared accomplishment. The lonely teacher and the giant stranger had kept their promise to each other and to generations they would never meet. 15 scholars had become hundreds, then thousands. The educational revolution continued spreading across expanding territories, carrying principles proven in Iron Creek to communities that desperately needed alternatives to failing traditional systems. And somewhere in distant settlements, other lonely teachers dreamed of impossible transformations while wondering if courage and persistence could really change their worlds. The answer was waiting in the story of Iron Creek, ready to inspire the next generation of reformers who would carry the revolution forward into an uncertain future. The promise had been fulfilled. The work continued. The transformation was permanent.